The grand ballroom of Ravenswood Palace sparkled under thousands of crystal chandeliers, each one casting dancing shadows across the marble floors that had witnessed centuries of royal celebrations. Tonight was different, though. Tonight marked the annual Royal Heritage Gala, an event that brought together nobility from across the kingdom and beyond. The air was thick with anticipation, expensive perfume, and the subtle tension that always seemed to follow the royal family wherever they gathered. King Alexander stood near the ornate fireplace, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the deep blue ceremonial uniform that had been passed down through generations of monarchs. At 68, he carried himself with the dignity expected of a man who had worn the crown for over 2 decades. His weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the room, acknowledging the respectful nods and curtsies from the assembled guests with practiced ease. Beside him, Queen Vivian adjusted her emerald necklace nervously. She had been Alexander's second wife for 15 years now, having married him after a scandal that rocked the kingdom when his first marriage ended in a very public and painful divorce. Vivian was elegant, intelligent, and had worked tirelessly to earn the respect of both the court and the people. Her auburn hair was swept into an elaborate updo, and her forest green gown complemented her striking hazel eyes. Despite her outward composure, those who knew her well could detect the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she occasionally glanced toward the entrance as if waiting for something to happen. The orchestra began playing a waltz as guests moved gracefully across the dance floor. Ministers, foreign ambassadors, wealthy merchants, and lesser nobility all mingled in carefully choreographed social patterns. Everyone knew their place, everyone understood the unspoken rules, and everyone was acutely aware that this gathering was about more than just celebration. It was about power, alliances, and the delicate balance that kept the kingdom stable. Near the far end of the ballroom, Crown Prince William moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone born to rule. At 42, he was the perfect heir apparent, combining his father's sense of duty with a more modern approach to monarchy that resonated with the younger generation. His dark hair was beginning to show hints of silver at the temples, and his deep brown eyes held both warmth and the weight of future responsibility. He wore his military dress uniform with pride, each medal and ribbon telling a story of service to the crown and country. But it was the woman beside him who truly captured the attention of everyone in the room. Princess Catherine had been married to William for 12 years, and in that time, she had transformed from a nervous young woman into one of the most beloved members of the royal family. Her chestnut brown hair cascaded in gentle waves over her shoulders, and her sapphire blue gown seemed to shimmer with each step she took. There was something magnetic about Catherine's presence, a warmth that drew people to her naturally. She had a gift for making everyone feel important, whether she was speaking with a foreign dignitary or a palace staff member. The couple moved through the crowd together, stopping to chat with various guests. Catherine's laugh was genuine and musical, often causing groups of people to turn and smile simply at the sound of her joy. William watched his wife with obvious affection, the kind of deep love that had only grown stronger over their years together. They were the golden couple of the royal family, representing everything the people hoped their monarchy could be: authentic, caring, and connected to the real world beyond palace walls. As the evening progressed, various members of the extended royal family made their appearances. Prince Henry, William's younger brother, arrived fashionably late with his wife Princess Margaret. They were the more rebellious branch of the family, known for their charitable work in war-torn regions and their tendency to speak their minds regardless of protocol. The Duke and Duchess of Westshire, Alexander's sister and her husband, held court near the Champagne Fountain, regaling listeners with stories of their recent archaeological expedition in Egypt. The evening's formal program began with King Alexander taking the stage to address the assembled guests. His voice, still strong despite his years, carried easily through the vast room as he spoke about the importance of tradition, the strength that came from unity, and the bright future he envisioned for the kingdom. The crowd listened respectfully, though many were more interested in the subtle dynamics playing out between family members than in the king's well-rehearsed speech. As Alexander spoke, Vivian stood beside him on the raised platform, her smile never wavering even as her eyes occasionally drifted to where William and Catherine stood in the crowd below. There had always been a complex relationship between the queen and her stepson's wife. On the surface, they maintained perfect royal decorum, but those close to the family sensed an underlying tension that neither woman ever openly acknowledged. The tension wasn't born of personal dislike, but rather from the inevitable comparison that the public and media constantly made between them. Catherine represented the future of the monarchy, young and vibrant, and connected to the people in ways that resonated across all social classes. Vivian, despite her many accomplishments and years of dedicated service, often found herself overshadowed by her stepdaughter-in-law's natural charisma and the public's obvious affection for her. After the king's speech, the formal dancing began. Following centuries of tradition, Alexander led Vivian in the first waltz, their movements precise and elegant as they glided across the polished floor. Other couples joined them gradually, creating a swirling tapestry of silk and satin, jewelry catching the light as the dancers moved in perfect harmony with the orchestra's music. William and Catherine took their turn on the dance floor, and it was impossible to miss the way other dancers instinctively gave them space, creating an invisible circle around the couple as they moved together with practiced grace. They danced as if they were the only two people in the room, lost in their own world of shared glances and whispered comments that made them both smile. But beneath the surface of this perfect royal evening, currents of change were beginning to stir. Palace staff whispered about unusual meetings between the king and his advisors, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when others entered the room. There were rumors of political challenges on the horizon, economic pressures that threatened the kingdom's stability, and questions about the monarchy's role in an increasingly complex world. Catherine had been particularly thoughtful lately, spending long hours in private consultation with various charitable organizations and educational institutions. She had always been passionate about social causes, but recently her involvement had intensified. William often found her in her private study late at night, surrounded by reports and proposals, working by lamplight long after the rest of the palace had gone to sleep. The evening was progressing smoothly when an unexpected announcement interrupted the festivities. The palace's chief of protocol stepped forward to inform the gathered guests that a special presentation would be made. This wasn't part of the planned program, and a murmur of curiosity rippled through the crowd as everyone turned their attention back to the royal platform. King Alexander stepped forward again, but this time his expression was more serious, more personal than during his earlier formal remarks. He looked out over the assembled crowd, his eyes eventually settling on William and Catherine, who stood hand in hand near the center of the room. Something passed between father and son in that moment, a look of understanding that spoke of private conversations and shared decisions. The king began to speak about change, about the evolution of royal duty, and about preparing for the future. His words were carefully chosen, but those who knew how to read between the lines of royal speeches began to sense that something significant was about to be announced. Vivian stood beside her husband, maintaining her composed expression even as a slight frown creased her brow. This wasn't part of the evening's planned events, and she was clearly as surprised as everyone else by this unexpected turn. As Alexander's words built towards some kind of announcement, the entire ballroom fell silent except for the gentle tinkling of crystal glasses and the rustling of expensive fabric as people shifted to hear better. The anticipation was almost tangible, and everyone present would later remember this moment as the one when everything began to change. The orchestra had stopped playing, leaving only the sound of hundreds of people breathing in unison as they waited to hear what their king had to say. Outside, storm clouds that had been gathering all evening finally opened up, sending rain against the tall windows that lined the ballroom. The weather seemed to mirror the sense that something momentous was about to happen, that this perfect evening of royal tradition was about to take an unexpected turn that would reshape everything that came after. King Alexander cleared his throat and stepped closer to the edge of the platform, his presence commanding absolute attention from every person in the grand ballroom. The silence was so complete that even the gentle patter of rain against the windows seemed amplified in the vast space. What happened next would be talked about in royal circles for years to come, analyzed and debated by historians and royal watchers alike. My dear friends, distinguished guests, and beloved family, Alexander began, his voice carrying the weight of years and the gravity of momentous decision. Tonight I stand before you not just as your king, but as a father and grandfather who has spent considerable time reflecting on the future of our great kingdom and the institution we all serve. William felt Catherine's hand tighten slightly in his own as they stood among the crowd. Both of them had sensed that this moment was coming, though neither had expected it to happen so publicly, so dramatically. They had been part of private family discussions over the past several months, conversations that had grown increasingly serious as various pressures on the monarchy intensified. The king continued, his gaze moving across the faces of the assembled guests before settling once again on his son and daughter-in-law. Throughout history, the strength of our monarchy has come not from rigid adherence to the past, but from our ability to adapt, to evolve, and to meet the needs of our people as those needs change. Tonight, I announce the beginning of a new chapter in that evolution. A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom as everyone tried to interpret what these carefully chosen words might mean. Foreign ambassadors leaned forward, their diplomatic training helping them recognize the significance of what they were witnessing. Members of the nobility exchanged glances, each trying to read the implications for their own positions and interests. After much consideration and consultation with my advisors, my family, and my own conscience, I am announcing that effective immediately, I will begin a gradual transition of daily royal responsibilities to Crown Prince William and Princess Catherine. This is not an abdication, he clarified quickly, noting the shocked expressions throughout the room, but rather a recognition that our kingdom's future lies in the capable hands of the next generation. The announcement hit the room like a thunderbolt. Queen Vivian's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly before she regained control. This was clearly not something she had been fully prepared for, despite whatever private discussions may have taken place. Her hands, clasped in front of her, tightened imperceptibly as she processed the implications of her husband's words. William stood straighter, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders in a way that was both familiar and entirely new. He had been preparing for this responsibility his entire life, but the reality of it happening now, in this moment, was overwhelming. Beside him, Catherine maintained her graceful composure, though those who knew her well could see the mix of determination and apprehension in her sapphire eyes. Prince William has demonstrated exceptional leadership in his various roles over the past decade. The king continued, his voice growing warmer as he spoke about his son. His military service, his charitable work, and his deep understanding of both traditional royal duties and the evolving needs of our modern society have prepared him well for this increased responsibility. The crowd began to murmur quietly as the full implications of the announcement sank in. This wasn't just a ceremonial change. This was a fundamental shift in power that would affect everything from state ceremonies to international relations. Palace staff in the background began whispering urgently among themselves, already calculating how this would change their own responsibilities and protocols. And Princess Catherine, Alexander's voice took on an even warmer tone as he acknowledged his daughter-in-law, has proven herself to be not just a devoted wife and mother, but a true partner in service to the crown and the people. Her compassion, intelligence, and natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life make her ideally suited to take on expanded royal duties. Catherine felt every eye in the room turn to her, and she drew strength from William's steady presence beside her. She had always known this day would come eventually, but she had imagined it happening gradually, privately, with time to prepare. Instead, she was being thrust into the spotlight in front of hundreds of witnesses, with no opportunity to process her emotions or gather her thoughts. The king gestured toward William and Catherine, and protocol demanded that they step forward. William squeezed his wife's hand once more before they began moving through the crowd, which parted respectfully to create a path toward the platform where Alexander and Vivian waited. Each step felt momentous, carrying them toward a future that would be fundamentally different from anything they had experienced before. As they approached the platform, the contrast between the two couples became more apparent. Alexander and Vivian stood together, but somehow apart, their body language speaking to a relationship built on mutual respect and shared duty rather than deep emotional connection. William and Catherine, meanwhile, moved as one unit, their connection visible to everyone watching, their partnership clearly built on a foundation of genuine love and shared purpose. When they reached the platform, Alexander stepped forward to embrace his son, a gesture that went beyond royal protocol to express genuine paternal pride and love. The embrace was brief but meaningful, and when they separated, both men's eyes were slightly damp with emotion. Alexander then turned to Catherine, taking her hands in his in a gesture that was both formal acknowledgement of her new status and personal recognition of the daughter-in-law who had brought such joy to his family. "Your Majesties," Catherine said softly, addressing both Alexander and Vivian with the respect due to their positions. "We are honored by your confidence in us, and we pledge to serve the crown and the people with all the dedication and integrity we possess." William nodded his agreement, adding, "We understand the magnitude of this responsibility, and we will work tirelessly to prove worthy of the trust you have placed in us." His voice was steady, but those who knew him could hear the emotion underlying his formal words. Vivian stepped forward then, and, for a moment, the entire room held its breath. This was perhaps the most delicate moment of the evening, as everyone wondered how the Queen would respond to this dramatic shift in royal hierarchy. Her expression was unreadable as she looked at Catherine, and several seconds passed in tense silence. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone present, Vivian reached out and gently took Catherine's other hand, the one not already held by Alexander. For a moment, the three of them stood connected in this symbolic gesture, representing the continuity and evolution of royal authority. But there was something in Vivian's eyes that suggested this gracious public gesture came at considerable personal cost. "Princess Catherine," Vivian said, her voice clear and steady despite whatever private emotions she might be experiencing. "You have always conducted yourself with dignity and grace. I have complete confidence that you will continue to honor the traditions of this family, while also bringing your own unique strengths to your expanded role." The words were perfectly chosen and perfectly delivered, but those closest to the royal family could detect the subtle tension in Vivian's voice, the slight stiffness in her posture that suggested this public display of support required significant effort. It was a masterful performance of royal duty overriding personal feelings, exactly the kind of sacrifice that royal life often demanded. The orchestra, taking their cue from the conclusion of these formal remarks, began playing the national anthem. The entire assembly rose to their feet, voices joining together in the familiar words that had been sung at countless royal occasions throughout the centuries. But, tonight, those words carried new meaning as everyone present understood they were witnessing a historic transition. As the anthem concluded, the formal portion of the evening's events came to an end, but the real drama was just beginning. Guests immediately began clustering into small groups, everyone eager to discuss what they had just witnessed. Foreign diplomats huddled together, already planning how to report these developments to their respective governments. Members of the nobility calculated how this power shift might affect their own positions and influence. Palace staff moved efficiently through the crowd, ensuring that glasses remained full and that the evening's social aspects continued smoothly despite the momentous announcement that had just transformed the atmosphere. But beneath the surface of continued celebration, everyone could sense that everything had changed in fundamental ways. The rain outside had intensified, creating a dramatic soundtrack to the evening's events as it drummed against the tall windows and echoed through the vast spaces of the palace. Inside, the warmth and light seemed almost protective against the storm, but there was no protection against the swirling undercurrents of ambition, jealousy, and uncertainty that the king's announcement had unleashed. William and Catherine found themselves immediately surrounded by well-wishers and those eager to align themselves with the new power structure. They handled the attention with characteristic grace, but both were clearly processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. This wasn't just a change in their titles or responsibilities. This was a fundamental alteration in their lives and their relationship with the institution they served. Meanwhile, Queen Vivian had withdrawn slightly from the center of attention, maintaining her regal bearing while dealing with the complex emotions that came with seeing her position in the royal hierarchy subtly, but significantly diminished. She continued to smile and acknowledge guests, but those who knew her well could see the effort it required. The hours following King Alexander's announcement unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance where everyone knew the steps, but no one was entirely certain of their partner. The ballroom had transformed from a scene of elegant celebration into a complex web of political maneuvering, personal relationships, and shifting loyalties. Every conversation, every gesture, every glance carried new weight as guests tried to navigate this unexpected change in royal hierarchy. Catherine found herself at the center of attention in ways that felt both familiar and entirely new. She had always been popular among the nobility and foreign dignitaries, but now their interest carried a different quality. These weren't just social pleasantries anymore. These were people positioning themselves in relation to someone who would soon wield considerably more influence than she had just hours earlier. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "Your Royal Highness," said Ambassador Morrison from the neighboring Kingdom of Algeria, approaching Catherine with his wife in tow, "may I express our profound congratulations on this momentous announcement. Queen Isabella has asked me to convey her personal invitation for you to visit our capital at your earliest convenience. She believes there are many opportunities for expanded cooperation between our kingdoms." Catherine smiled graciously while her mind raced through the implications. Just this morning, Ambassador Morrison had barely acknowledged her beyond basic diplomatic courtesy. Now he was offering state visits and hinting at international partnerships. The speed with which people recalibrated their approach to her was both impressive and somewhat discouraging in its obvious calculation. "Ambassador Morrison, please convey our warmest regards to Queen Isabella," Catherine replied smoothly. "I would be delighted to discuss opportunities for strengthened relations between our kingdoms. Perhaps we could arrange for formal discussions once Prince William and I have had time to settle into our expanded responsibilities." William appeared at her side just as the ambassador was expressing his enthusiasm for future collaborations. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that they would face these new challenges together rather than alone. Over their years of marriage, they had developed an almost telepathic ability to support each other in social situations, and tonight that skill was proving invaluable. Lord Pemberton has been sharing some interesting thoughts about the economic implications of tonight's announcement, William said quietly to Catherine as they found a brief moment of relative privacy near one of the tall windows. "It seems our expanded role is already being viewed as an opportunity for various trade and investment initiatives." Catherine nodded, understanding the subtext. Their new positions would make them targets for everyone with an agenda, from foreign governments seeking advantageous treaties to domestic business interests hoping for royal endorsement. Learning to navigate these requests while maintaining their integrity and independence would be one of their greatest challenges. Across the room, Queen Vivian was engaged in her own complex social navigation. Lady Worthington, one of her oldest friends and confidants, had approached with obvious concern written across her aristocratic features. "My dear Vivian," Lady Worthington said in a low voice, "I must say this evening's announcement came as quite a surprise. How are you feeling about all these changes?" Vivian's smile never wavered, but her eyes revealed a flicker of the strain she was experiencing. "Change is the nature of monarchy, Charlotte. We adapt, and we serve, regardless of our personal feelings about the circumstances. But surely Alexander discussed this with you beforehand? This seems like such a significant decision to announce so publicly without warning." The question touched on something that had been troubling Vivian throughout the evening. While she had been aware that discussions about succession planning were ongoing, the timing and public nature of tonight's announcement had caught her off guard. She suspected that her husband's decision to make this announcement tonight, in this way, had been influenced by factors she wasn't fully aware of. "His Majesty has always been thoughtful in his decision-making," she replied diplomatically, though her careful choice of words revealed more than she intended. Lady Worthington, who had known Vivian since childhood, could read between the lines and understand that her friend was struggling with aspects of this situation that went beyond mere protocol concerns. Meanwhile, other members of the royal family were dealing with their own reactions to the evening's developments. Prince Henry, William's younger brother, had initially felt relieved that the increased responsibilities were falling on his older brother rather than on him. But, as the evening progressed, he began to understand how this change would affect his own position within the family hierarchy. "It's quite remarkable, really," Princess Margaret, Henry's wife, observed as they stood together watching the crowd's reaction to William and Catherine. 6 months ago, Catherine was worried about whether her charity work was receiving too much media attention. Now she's being positioned to influence international relations. Henry nodded thoughtfully. "William's ready for this. He's been preparing his whole life. But I wonder if any of us are really ready for how much everything is going to change." There was a note of concern in his voice that his wife didn't miss. As the spare to the heir, Henry had always existed somewhat in his brother's shadow. But this development would make that dynamic even more pronounced. The Duke and Duchess of Westshire, Alexander's sister Princess Eleanor, and her husband, were observing the evening's developments with the detached interest of people whose own positions were secure enough to allow for objective analysis. "Alexander's timing is interesting," the Duke observed to his wife as they watched the various social dynamics playing out around them. There have been rumors about pressure from Parliament regarding the monarchy's role in the new economic initiatives. This transition could be his way of addressing those concerns while maintaining royal influence. Princess Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Catherine's popularity with the younger generation certainly doesn't hurt in that regard. She represents a modernization of royal image without abandoning traditional values. It's quite clever, actually, if that's what Alexander is aiming for. Their conversation highlighted one of the underlying currents that most guests were only beginning to recognize. This wasn't just a family decision about succession planning. This was a strategic move designed to ensure the monarchy's continued relevance and influence in a rapidly changing political landscape. Back in the center of the ballroom, Catherine found herself in conversation with Lady Ashford, one of the kingdom's most influential socialites, and a woman known for her sharp intelligence and even sharper tongue. Princess Catherine, you must be feeling quite overwhelmed by all of this, Lady Ashford said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Going from supporting royal duties to leading them is quite a leap. I do hope you feel adequately prepared for the challenges ahead. The comment was delivered with perfect politeness, but Catherine recognized the subtle challenge it contained. Lady Ashford was known for testing people, particularly those she perceived as rising too quickly or without sufficient preparation. Catherine had encountered this type of veiled skepticism before and had learned to address it directly but graciously. I appreciate your concern, Lady Ashford, Catherine replied with genuine warmth. You're absolutely right that this is a significant transition. I've been blessed to have wonderful mentors and advisors, and I'm committed to continuing my education in all aspects of royal responsibility. I believe that acknowledging what we don't know is the first step toward learning what we need to know. The response was perfect, striking just the right balance between humility and confidence. Lady Ashford's expression shifted slightly, revealing grudging respect for Catherine's diplomatic skill. Around them, others who had been listening to the exchange nodded approvingly at Catherine's handling of what could have been an awkward moment. William had witnessed the exchange from nearby and felt a surge of pride in his wife's grace under pressure. He was beginning to understand that one of the most challenging aspects of their new roles would be dealing with people who questioned their readiness or qualifications, either from genuine concern or from less admirable motives. As the evening progressed, the rain outside had begun to subside, but the storm of emotions and political calculations inside the ballroom continued to intensify. Palace staff moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, ensuring that the social aspects of the evening continued smoothly while also beginning the complex process of adjusting protocols and procedures for the new royal hierarchy. Queen Vivian excused herself from her conversation with Lady Worthington and made her way toward where King Alexander was speaking with the Prime Minister and several other government officials. Their conversation looked serious, and she could see that whatever they were discussing was related to the evening's announcement. As Queen, she had every right to be included in such discussions, but something in the body language of the group suggested that her approach might not be entirely welcome. The realization stung more than she cared to admit. For 15 years, she had worked tirelessly to establish herself as a trusted advisor and full partner to her husband in royal duties. The possibility that this transition might diminish her influence or access to important discussions was something she hadn't fully considered when Alexander had first mentioned the possibility of increasing William and Catherine's responsibilities. As she drew closer to the group, the conversation paused, and Alexander turned to acknowledge her with a smile that seemed genuine, but somehow didn't erase the awkwardness of the moment. My dear, I was just discussing some of the logistical aspects of the transition with the Prime Minister. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow's formal meetings. The dismissal was gentle but clear, and Vivian found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to gracefully withdraw from a conversation that, just hours earlier, she would have been automatically included in. She managed a gracious smile and made an appropriate comment about not wanting to interrupt important business, but the moment marked a subtle but significant shift in her position within the royal power structure. Catherine, who had been watching from across the room, witnessed this interaction and felt a complex mix of emotions. She had never desired to diminish Queen Vivian's role or influence, and seeing the older woman's obvious discomfort made her acutely aware of the personal costs that came with political and ceremonial changes. It was a reminder that in royal life, personal relationships were always intertwined with questions of power and position. As the evening reached its peak, an unexpected incident occurred that would crystallize all the tensions and emotions that had been building throughout the night. The moment came during what should have been a routine ceremonial presentation, but instead became a defining scene that everyone present would remember for years to come. The palace's master of ceremonies announced that it was time for the traditional presentation of the Royal Heritage Medal, an annual honor given to individuals who had made exceptional contributions to the kingdom's cultural and historical preservation. This year's recipient was Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a renowned historian whose work on royal genealogy had become the definitive reference for understanding the monarchy's evolution through the centuries. According to long-established protocol, the reigning monarch would present the medal, accompanied by the queen and the heir apparent. It was a simple ceremony that had been performed countless times, but tonight's version carried new significance given the announcement about expanded royal responsibilities. King Alexander took his position at the center of the platform, with Queen Vivian standing to his right, as protocol demanded. The expectation was that Prince William would join them in his traditional position to the king's left. Dr. Hartwell approached the platform with the dignity befitting someone who had spent her life studying royal traditions, clearly honored to receive recognition from the crown. But, as William moved to take his customary position, something unexpected happened. King Alexander, in a gesture that seemed spontaneous but carried profound symbolic weight, reached out and gently took Princess Catherine's hand, drawing her forward to stand beside him instead of in her usual position slightly behind the main grouping. The ballroom fell silent as everyone recognized the significance of what was happening. This wasn't just a minor adjustment in positioning. This was a visual representation of Catherine's elevated status within the royal hierarchy. By placing her in the position traditionally reserved for the direct heir, Alexander was making a statement about her new role that went beyond mere words. Catherine felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her as she found herself standing in this unprecedented position. Her heart raced, but her years of royal training allowed her to maintain her composure even as she understood that this moment would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. She could feel William's supportive presence nearby, but this gesture was clearly meant to highlight her individual importance rather than her role as part of a royal couple. Queen Vivian's reaction was subtle but unmistakable to those who knew how to read royal body language. Her perfectly maintained smile flickered for just a moment, and her posture became slightly more rigid as she processed the implications of her husband's gesture. This wasn't just about ceremonial positioning. This was about the future power structure of the royal family, and she was witnessing her own influence being symbolically diminished in front of the entire court. The presentation of the medal proceeded according to tradition, with King Alexander speaking about Dr. Hartwell's contributions and the importance of preserving historical knowledge. But everyone in the ballroom was more focused on the unprecedented arrangement of royals on the platform than on the actual ceremony taking place. Dr. Hartwell, despite her scholarly background and understanding of royal protocol, seemed somewhat surprised by the configuration of royals presenting her award. She had studied royal ceremonies for decades, but she had never seen an arrangement quite like this one. Her trained historian's eye immediately recognized that she was witnessing a moment of historical significance, even as she tried to focus on receiving her honor with appropriate grace and dignity. As the formal presentation concluded and Dr. Hartwell was escorted away with her medal, the arranged grouping of royals remained on the platform for several moments longer than usual. This extended display gave everyone in the ballroom additional time to observe and interpret what they were seeing. Photographers from the official royal media captured numerous images, each one documenting this unprecedented arrangement for posterity. When the family finally began to move off the platform, another unexpected moment occurred. Instead of following traditional protocols where family members would descend in strict order of precedence, King Alexander continued to hold Catherine's hand, guiding her down the steps beside him while Queen Vivian and Prince William followed behind. This seemingly simple gesture had profound implications. In royal ceremonies, physical positioning and the order of movement communicate messages about status, respect, and hierarchy that are understood by everyone familiar with court protocols. Alexander's continued physical connection to Catherine, combined with the altered positioning, was sending a clear message about her new status within the family structure. Catherine handled the attention with characteristic grace, but those close to her could see the mix of emotions she was experiencing. Pride at the recognition of her new role was tempered by awareness of the discomfort this moment was causing others, particularly Queen Vivian. Catherine had never sought to diminish anyone else's position, and finding herself at the center of what was clearly a delicate political and personal moment was challenging. William, meanwhile, was dealing with his own complex reactions to witnessing his wife being elevated in such a public and symbolic way. His love and pride in Catherine's accomplishments was genuine, but he was also acutely aware that this gesture from his father carried implications that extended far beyond tonight's ceremony. The monarchy was evolving, and these changes would affect every aspect of their lives going forward. The moment that truly shocked everyone came as the royal family reached the base of the platform. Queen Vivian, who had been maintaining her composed demeanor throughout these unprecedented events, found herself standing slightly apart from the others. The traditional protocols that had guided her movements for 15 years suddenly seemed unclear, leaving her momentarily uncertain about where she belonged in this new configuration. It was then that Catherine, demonstrating the emotional intelligence and grace that had made her so beloved by the public, made a gesture that surprised everyone present. Releasing King Alexander's hand, she stepped toward Queen Vivian with a warm smile and gently took the older woman's arm, drawing her back into the central grouping. "Your Majesty," Catherine said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom, "your guidance and wisdom have been invaluable to our family. I hope I can continue to learn from your example as we move forward together." The gesture was both generous and politically astute, acknowledging Queen Vivian's continued importance while also demonstrating Catherine's own grace and maturity. The words were carefully chosen to show respect without diminishing Catherine's own new status, and the physical gesture of inclusion helped to ease some of the tension that had been building throughout the evening. Queen Vivian's response was a masterclass in royal deportment under pressure. Despite whatever private emotions she might have been experiencing, she smiled warmly at Catherine and responded with perfect grace. "Princess Catherine, your kindness and wisdom continue to be a blessing to this family and to the kingdom. I look forward to supporting you in whatever way I can as you embrace these new responsibilities." The exchange lasted only a few moments, but it demonstrated both women's understanding of their complex situation and their commitment to handling it with dignity. The assembled crowd watched this interaction with fascination, recognizing that they were witnessing a delicate negotiation of power and relationships playing out in real time. King Alexander observed this interaction between his wife and daughter-in-law with obvious approval. His earlier gesture of taking Catherine's hand had been calculated to send a message about the changing royal hierarchy, but Catherine's response showed that she understood the importance of maintaining family unity even amid significant changes. This balance between asserting new authority and respecting existing relationships would be crucial for the monarchy's stability going forward. Prince William stepped forward then, joining the three of them in a gesture that symbolically reunited the family unit despite the evening's revelations about changing roles and responsibilities. His presence helped to stabilize the moment, reminding everyone that these changes were happening within the context of family relationships rather than as political maneuvering between rivals. The orchestra, taking their cue from the conclusion of this emotionally charged sequence, began playing again, gradually returning the ballroom to its earlier atmosphere of celebration. But everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something unprecedented, a moment when royal traditions bent to accommodate new realities while still maintaining the dignity and stability that the monarchy represented. As guests began to move and conversation resumed, the evening continued with dancing and socializing, but the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. Catherine found herself approached by even more people seeking to establish relationships with someone whose influence had just been dramatically elevated. William stayed close by her side, providing support while also beginning to understand how these changes would affect their partnership and their individual roles. Queen Vivian, meanwhile, was surrounded by friends and supporters who were clearly concerned about how the evening's events might affect her position and well-being. She handled their attention with the same grace she had shown throughout the evening, but those closest to her could see that she was processing emotions and implications that would take considerable time to fully understand. The rain outside had stopped completely, and stars were becoming visible through the clearing clouds. Inside the ballroom, the evening continued with all the elegance and sophistication expected of a royal gathering, but everyone present knew that they had witnessed a historical moment when the monarchy had begun a new chapter in its long evolution. The final hours of the Royal Heritage Gala unfolded with a subdued elegance that reflected the profound changes everyone had witnessed. As midnight approached, and guests began their graceful departures, the true implications of the evening's events started to crystallize for everyone involved. The carefully orchestrated social dance of royal life had been permanently altered, and each member of the family was beginning to understand what their new reality would look like. Catherine found herself in the unique position of being both the center of attention and a careful observer of how others were reacting to her elevated status. As she bid farewell to various dignitaries and nobles, she was acutely aware that these weren't just social pleasantries anymore. These were relationship-building exercises with people who would be looking to her for leadership, guidance, and decision-making in ways they never had before. "Your Royal Highness," Lord Chancellor Morrison approached as the evening wound down, "I wanted to ensure you're aware that there will need to be several briefing sessions scheduled within the coming weeks. Your expanded role will require familiarity with various state matters that haven't previously been within your portfolio." The practical reality of her new responsibilities was beginning to sink in. Catherine had always been involved in royal duties, but those had primarily focused on charitable work, cultural events, and public appearances. Now she would need to understand complex political relationships, economic policies, and international diplomatic protocols that she had only observed from a distance. "I appreciate your guidance, Lord Chancellor," she replied thoughtfully. "I'm eager to learn everything necessary to serve effectively in this expanded capacity. Perhaps we could begin with an overview of the most pressing current issues that require immediate attention." William joined their conversation, and Catherine felt grateful for his steady presence as they began to navigate these new expectations together. They had always been a partnership, but now their roles would be more closely intertwined than ever before. The decisions they made and the way they handled their responsibilities would affect not just their own lives, but the future of the monarchy itself. Across the ballroom, Queen Vivian was engaged in her own conversations about the evening's developments, but the tone of these discussions was markedly different from those surrounding Catherine. Friends and supporters were clearly concerned about how the changes might affect her influence and position within the royal hierarchy. "My dear Vivian," Lady Worthington said quietly as they found a moment of relative privacy, "you've handled tonight's surprises with remarkable grace. But I must ask, how are you really feeling about all of this?" Vivian paused for a moment, considering how much to reveal even to her closest friend. The truth was complex and painful, involving feelings of displacement, concern about her future role, and worry about how these changes might affect her relationships within the royal family. "Charlotte, 15 years ago when I married Alexander, I understood that my role would always be defined in relation to the institution rather than as an independent position," she said carefully. "What I perhaps didn't fully anticipate was how quickly and dramatically those definitions might change." Lady Worthington nodded sympathetically, understanding the diplomatic way her friend was expressing what had to be considerable personal distress. "Will you speak with Alexander privately about tonight's developments? Surely some of this came as a surprise even to you." "There will certainly be conversations that need to happen," Vivian replied, her tone suggesting that those discussions might be more challenging than she was prepared to admit publicly. "For now, my focus is on supporting the family and the institution, regardless of my personal feelings about how these changes were announced or implemented." Meanwhile, King Alexander was beginning to understand that his dramatic gesture during the medal presentation had created ripple effects throughout the royal family that would require careful management. His decision to elevate Catherine's symbolic position had been intended to demonstrate his confidence in her capabilities, but he was starting to realize that the personal cost to his relationship with Vivian might have been higher than he had anticipated. Prince Henry and Princess Margaret had observed the evening's events with growing concern about how the changes would affect the entire extended royal family. As they prepared to leave the palace, they found themselves discussing implications that went far beyond the immediate participants. "William and Catherine will handle their new responsibilities well," Margaret observed as they walked toward their waiting car. "But I'm worried about how isolated this might make Vivian feel. She's worked so hard to establish herself in this family, and tonight's events could undermine years of careful relationship building." Henry nodded grimly. Father's gesture was powerful symbolically, but I'm not sure he fully considered the personal dynamics involved. Catherine didn't ask for that kind of dramatic elevation, and Vivian certainly didn't deserve to be diminished so publicly. Their conversation reflected concerns that were being echoed throughout the royal family and court circles. The changes in responsibility and hierarchy were necessary and probably inevitable, but the way they had been announced and demonstrated had created personal tensions that would need to be addressed carefully to maintain family unity. As the last guests departed and the ballroom began to empty, the immediate royal family found themselves together in a way that felt both familiar and entirely changed. The four of them, Alexander, Vivian, William, and Catherine, stood in the vast space that had witnessed so many historical moments, dealing with the reality that their relationships with each other had been permanently altered by the evening's events. King Alexander was the first to address the elephant in the room, his voice carrying both authority and a note of uncertainty that was rare for him. "I believe some private family discussion is warranted after tonight's developments," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "There are aspects of this transition that we need to address openly, and honestly, if we're going to move forward successfully." Catherine felt her heart rate increase as she recognized that the real challenges were just beginning. The public ceremony and symbolic gestures had been one thing, but navigating the personal and political implications within the family would be far more complex and delicate. "Your Majesty," she said respectfully, "I want to ensure that everyone understands I never sought to diminish anyone's position or importance. Tonight's events were as surprising to me as they were to everyone else, and my greatest hope is that we can work together to make these transitions as smooth as possible for everyone involved." Vivian looked at Catherine with an expression that was difficult to read, mixing appreciation for the younger woman's sensitivity with the pain of her own changing circumstances. "Catherine, you've conducted yourself with remarkable grace tonight," Vivian replied. "This situation isn't about personal relationships between us. It's about institutional changes that affect all of us in different ways. We all need time to understand and adjust to these new realities." William stepped forward, understanding that his role in mediating between his father, his wife, and his stepmother would be crucial for family harmony going forward. "Perhaps we could schedule formal family meetings over the coming weeks to discuss the practical aspects of these transitions," he suggested diplomatically. "There are certainly logistical and protocol questions that need to be addressed, and I think we'll all benefit from clear communication about expectations and responsibilities." The suggestion was practical and gave everyone a framework for moving forward without forcing immediate resolution of the emotional and political tensions that the evening had created. King Alexander nodded approvingly, recognizing his son's wisdom in providing structure for what could otherwise become a series of difficult and potentially damaging personal confrontations. As they began to leave the ballroom, one final moment crystallized the complex dynamics that would define their relationships going forward. Catherine, walking beside William, instinctively slowed her pace to allow King Alexander and Queen Vivian to proceed ahead of them, a gesture that acknowledged both the traditional hierarchy and her sensitivity to Vivian's feelings about the evening's changes. Vivian noticed the gesture and felt a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. Catherine's kindness was genuine, but it also highlighted how much their relative positions had shifted. The gesture was both respectful and somehow patronizing, a reminder that Catherine now held enough power to choose when and how to show deference. The palace corridors were quiet as the family made their way to their private quarters, each person lost in thoughts about what the future would hold. Palace staff, who had witnessed the evening's dramatic events, began the process of cleaning and restoring the ballroom, while also adjusting their own understanding of royal protocols and hierarchies. In the days and weeks that followed, the ripple effects of that extraordinary evening would continue to reshape not just the royal family's internal dynamics, but the monarchy's relationship with Parliament, the media, and the people of the kingdom. Catherine and William would begin intensive briefings and preparation for their expanded roles, while Vivian would have to navigate the delicate process of redefining her own position and influence within the changed royal structure. The gesture that had shocked everyone, King Alexander taking Catherine's hand and elevating her symbolic position, would be remembered as a pivotal moment in royal history. But, perhaps more importantly, Catherine's response, her sensitivity to others' feelings, and her commitment to maintaining family unity despite personal advancement, would set the tone for how she would approach her new responsibilities as a senior member of the royal family. As the palace settled into quiet after the eventful evening, Each member of the royal family was left to contemplate how their lives had been forever changed by a single gesture that had lasted only moments, but would influence their relationships and responsibilities for years to come. The monarchy was evolving, as it always had throughout history, but the personal costs and rewards of that evolution were being felt most acutely by those at its very center.